What are your reflections on this climate week so far?
So I've seen three things that are really exciting. One is a lot more adaptation and resilience content. It seems like both corporate insurers, practitioners, climate folks are starting to really understand the thesis, which is exciting. The second thing is a focus on finance. Last year, and maybe this is a little bit self-selecting, it felt like a lot of it was defining the problem, defining the business case, and now it's conversations around, well, how do we finance this work? And people are getting serious about digging into deals and specific projects and how that work is financed. And the third thing is participation from insurance. This is something where, given the macro climate, you're seeing different folks changing language and pulling away, but insurance is really stepping into the business case for resilience and how it impacts their sector.
Mm-hmm. Same question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would say one of the big notable things this year for me, and this is my third climate week, has been just I'm sitting in a lot more rooms with a lot of different sort of corporate functions, finance, sustainability, just different parts of the companies, and they're all coming together, which is super important, right? If you're trying to sort of decarbonize the economy and increase the resilience of the built environment, you got to have a lot of different stakeholders. So I've been encouraged by that because we can all talk together to figure out what the problems are. I think the second big thing that we're seeing is companies that are in the lead on this are really starting to get pretty direct about how they want this to cascade into their supply chains and just backing up and leveraging their business and the power of their business to say we need people to be decarbonizing, we need companies to be decarbonizing, companies to be increasing their resilience because they're starting to get concerned. So and then of course we'll get into sort of this cross-sectoral collaboration and coordination on how we need to be working together to increase the resilience. There is a growing appreciation, despite some of the sort of transitory political winds that are blowing around. The underlying fundamental trends of increasing risk, increasing expense, and is all very real for the business world. And so you're starting to see people increase their attention, potentially their investment. The last point that I would make, and it's sort of on the mitigation side of the equation, is there's a lot of folks beginning to challenge this concept of a green premium. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? In other words, what is it? What are we comparing that to? Are we comparing that to the old buildings that weren't green and somehow we're going to price in that differential? Shouldn't we be setting our built environment designs for the future, both low carbon and high resilience assets? And then why are we really framing that differential always for decarb as a premium? It just should be the way we build. And that way the suppliers of the world, who for us, we're building a lot of buildings, the construction materials, they just need to understand where the market is going and shift their innovation and their investments to meet what the market is doing, instead of saying, if you want it, just pay me and I'll do it. No, this is where the markets are going. So that kind of collective pressure of the big companies cascading it down into their supply chains and some of this thinking gives me a lot of enthusiasm for what 26 and 27 could look like. Very exciting.
And it sounds like a more sophisticated conversation that might have been having 5 years ago as well. I'm glad we're going more into the nuances and trying to unpack things like a green premium, rather than just saying there is a green premium, it's an unalloyed good, we should all be invested in this. I want to talk a little bit about key concerns and themes you might have heard. You both already mentioned some, but federal policies loomed large over this last year in terms of how it's affecting climate work. But one thing I'm also hearing a lot, especially in the adaptation space, is that, well, actually, now we're kind of stripping back as corporates, as investors, and looking at really how physical climate risks could affect our bottom line, could be disrupting our businesses, and really kind of focusing down on that and trying to move away from that kind of disclosure-focused mindset of the past. And I'm wondering, does that resonate with you? And what other themes and concerns have you been hearing from panelists and networkers, etc.?
Yeah, there's a really great piece by Potential Energy, and it's called Materiality Over Morality. Mm-hmm. And I think that this idea of how is the materiality of climate change starting to impact companies is becoming the centerpiece of how we're talking about climate risk and climate resilience. And so as I've kind of navigated both Climate Week and even our work at the Resiliency Company, making that argument about how physical risks are manifesting across budgets and P&Ls, and particularly like O&M, is a really great way to make the case around investing in adaptation and resilience. The other, thing that one of our portfolio company talks about is the difference between, previous climate narratives and where we're at today is adaptation and resilience is a muscle that we need to build. It's something that we need to just bake into the way that we think about processes and systems. This isn't going to be something that we solve. We're not just going to solve resilience
it's a
and
moving
be
target.
resilient. Right. So this is something that I think is going to be an ongoing dialogue. And the more that businesses start recognizing how risk manifests and the different solution sets that we have over time to adapt and become more resilient is going to elevate the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. I think just to start with a little bit of a visual, if you think about a building and how it comes into existence, oftentimes you have investors and lenders, that goes to developers, that go to designers, builders, owners and tenants, and ultimately insurance companies. Prior to where we're at right now, what we've seen is just sort of a risk shift, and the risk has been going from left to right, and the price signal has been going from right to left. And so the risk is shifting down. It gets ultimately to the insurance companies, who are very, very sophisticated in how they price this, how they plan for it, how they cover for it. And they're pricing their policies both in terms of the premiums, what they're willing to cover, and that price signal is coming back up. So what you're starting to see today is people are starting to understand, I've got to think beyond what's been traditional value extraction. Right? Some people are involved early stage. I'm going to invest. I'm going to have a short asset hold time. I'm going to sell in 18 months to 3 years. They are now starting to say, I should be more concerned, because when that asset does go to market and when investors go to buy it, they're going to want to know, is it built to code? Is it something that's, Abby, I think you've drilled this into us. If it's not insurable, it's not investable. You know what I mean? And so we're starting to see, from topical conversations to sector-specific solutions and how we bring the stakeholders together to start working on these solutions in more of a partnership mindset. So there's some opportunities to innovate both insurance products, financial products, and just how we work together as stakeholders. And so I think coming out of Climate Week and some of these discussions, that's where the conversation is going to go, which I'm excited for.
Well, thank you for those reflections. Now I want to get into each of your day jobs, so to speak. Abby, starting with you, can you tell us a little bit about the Resiliency Company, how you came into it, founded it, what its mission is, where the money's coming from? Yes, give us the whole rundown.
Sure. So the Resiliency Company is really here to help humanity adapt over a long time horizon, recognizing that climate is changing and so are the risks. So we're central to our thesis is the fact that all of our infrastructure across the built environment is going to need to be more resilient, and will adapt either by force as a result of disasters and hazards, or by design because we bake it into how we build infrastructure. So those are kind of our two mission and visions, which is one, helping communities after disaster recover to be more resilient because risk is increasing, and two, to make sure that the way that we start building things is more resilient. So that's kind of central to how we work. We've created practices across 3 different types of infrastructure: residential, commercial, and public infrastructure. And central to our role is kind of 2 things. One is we like to tell a big, good story about the importance of resilience. What does it mean? How to finance it? The role of different sectors and networks is like, this is not something that just one sector can do on its own. We have to bring different folks together. So tell a big story is one. The second one is creating conditions for success. Because we've had a stable climate for the past 12,000 years, and we no longer do, this is something we haven't had to do before as humans, which means we don't know how to finance it. So a lot of our work is thinking about what are new financial innovations, fund design, systems, partnerships that can exist that helps get money unstuck or moving into more resilient infrastructure.
Yes, that's a very good point about financing for a world that we don't understand, right? And there's I think it was from one of the articles from one of Insurance for Good, and they were talking about, yes, insurability only deals in a world, it doesn't deal in a world where there's kind of certainty of impacts, also massive uncertainty. It has to be a sort of like a corridor of probability where it works, and right now all those probabilities are being thrown into the air by climate change. Can I ask a little bit about some of the projects you've been doing as well? What have you got done this year? What do you hope to get done next year?
Sure. So one of our big flagship projects is called the Resilient Delta Fund. And that really kind of came out of, after the fires in Los Angeles, we recognized that community, is about to embark on rebuilding close to $200 billion worth of infrastructure. And so we brought different stakeholders together across insurance, builders and architects, financial institutions, and community groups to talk about, well, what is the vision for rebuilding and how do we make sure that it is more resilient to, especially in a place where wildfire risk is increasing. Insurance markets are signaling the risk. And what we recognize is that there are kind of systemic reasons why we don't rebuild to a more resilient standard, including building codes, including insurance payouts, including how government funds flow. And then there's some like human behavior reasons. One, not everybody knows that we actually have the engineering science to build homes to be safer from wildfire. So there's an education and awareness component. There's also the resources. So what kind of landscaping architect, what kind of builder, what kind of GC should I use to select the right building materials and put together a more resilient home? And then the third one that we've really zeroed in on is, how do I pay for this? So the funding and financing, if you can't answer that question for a homeowner that is navigating a rebuild process, they're not going to persist through the education and the cobbling together resources.
Got enough going on.
Exactly. So that's why we launched the Resilient Delta Fund, is to cover that delta, because today it costs more to rebuild to a resilient standard. And we've selected the Institute for Building Home and Safety, IBHS, Wildfire Prepared Plus standard, because it provides consistency and clarity to the homeowner on how to build a resilient home. That also provides underwriting criteria for banks that haven't really lent on this thesis before. So the goal of the Resilient Delta Fund is to kind of start institutionalizing what it means to do resilient home lending in a market where we know homes are going to get built, where we know that resilient homes will really make a difference. And kind of metrics of success there are everything from like increasing the survivability and livability of homes and communities, and also thinking about what that means for availability and affordability of insurance in a market where insurance premiums are skyrocketing and traditional insurers are leaving.
And just quickly, what's the status of the Resilient Delta Fund?
So it's going really well. We will probably have an announcement early in 26 around grant capital.
Exciting.
CDFI capital, working with some local lenders on that, and even some institutional capital, because our goal is widespread access, especially with wildfire as a peril. This is something where the concentration, the more homes, the better, because it de-risks. So we're building the fund really with that programmatic focus of everybody should rebuild to a resilient home, so we want to make the capital available.
Okay, and Joe, turning to you, can you tell us what Ryan Companies is all about?
Sure, yeah. I would just add a little bit to what you were saying.
Sure.
You know, Allstate and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have published a couple of reports. One, for every dollar invested in resilience, saves $13 in damages and costs. You know, this has just been work that's been done by the insurance industry with the U.S. Chamber. They've also come up with another report that said for every dollar not invested, you're going to probably sustain almost $35 in economic loss when an event occurs, economic activity losses. So the knock-on benefits of helping homeowners in this case, you know, and then more broadly expanding that to the commercial sector, and then the government's working together, there's just a big protection of economic value beyond the asset that's really important to capture. But Ryan Companies, it's good that you asked, because many people probably haven't heard of us. We're a private, owned by a family trust. We're about $4.5 billion a year growing commercial real estate company. And we do real estate development, design, construction. We manage millions of square feet of real estate. And we also have a capital markets practice where we source the debt and equity. And we also use that team as an investment, sometimes taking small stakes. Sometimes we'll do buildings on spec where we're 100% owner. So my job as Chief Sustainability Officer includes resilience. I'm trying to drive decarbonization, increasing resilience through all of that. And our strategies for sustainability and resilience are really business strategies. You know, I always tell everybody we don't have a sustainability and resilience strategy. We have a sustainability and resilience business strategy, because we're so convinced in the underlying trends and the value that could be created. And Abby's giving you a good examples of how that could happen. So, yeah, that's a little bit about what we're trying to do. We do mostly industrial buildings. I won't get into all the different kinds because, you know, I don't know if all our clients and partners would want us to do that. But a lot of big industrial buildings that you would be very familiar with. So that's a little bit about Ryan Companies. And, you know, our segue into this space, like sort of the things that we started to feel, because I just emphasize in commercial real estate, it's a little bit unique to have development, design, construction, all the way through to investment. Like a lot of commercial real estates would be one or two of those verticals. We do it all in an integrated way, and we call that collective insight internally. So any point in the commercial real estate process, we can bring the perspectives of those other areas into that to really kind of make sure we're tuning it up and delivering the asset that makes the most sense. We started to see pricing signals coming in. We're starting to see increases in property insurance. We're starting to see during the construction phase, which we may not get into today, but real risks to worker health and safety because of climate change, or extreme weather affecting the progress of construction sites. And then, in these areas that get hit by a wildfire or a hurricane, the cost to fix what was damaged during the storm, doubles or triples because of shortages in labor and shortages in material availability. So we started to see these pricing signals, and now, in next year, of course, I don't know if we'll get into the California rules, but Senate Bill 261 is going to create this massive transparency in climate risk out in the market, right? They're requiring people to report, which I think is a good thing. I think anytime you increase transparency, you increase activity. So we're seeing that a lot of folks are going to be really needing to understand exactly what my risks are at any moment in time. And with buildings, it's a function of the building type, the location, the climate. There's just so many factors that you can't have a one size fits all.
Very asset specific, right?
It's very asset, location, climate specific. And so we're trying to build those capabilities to make sure that we're in a position where we can advise. There's some other reasons why, because there's some emerging issues, and we're going to get into some wonky things here. But
sure.
So there's a, and maybe you've touched this on some of your other discussions, but with force majeure, right? What is an act of God? Well, it's an interesting philosophical question, right? And
it's a big insurance question as well. And contract discussion as well.
Exactly. So so we're starting to sit down, with all these different stakeholders that we talked about earlier, and we're starting to sit down and say, okay, how do we talk about this? What are we going to say is force majeure? What do we say is not going to be? Let's just be open and upfront and have candid discussions about that, so we can either find some kind of parametric insurance product or some other insurance product that would help us, to de-risk that a little bit. But so bringing that transparency into the discussion. The other area that is, I think, of equal concern is, as a developer or as a designer, there's this question of standard of care. And so we've hit on the idea of building codes being not commensurate with local climate risks. And that's a whole nother interesting discussion as to why that is. There's a lot of politics and economics under that, and a lot of rear view mirroring instead of looking forward to what the risks should really be. But the question is, hey, if you come in and you decide to code minimum, and I sit down and say, I'll give you the building that you want, code minimum is typically what you would do in any location. And we're saying, well, you've already had a couple of Cat 5 storms here. Maybe we should build the 200-mile-an-hour wind loadings. We'd recommend that. It's a 1% premium on the build, And we would like to have that discussion, because it's talking about how can we make you more resilient. At the end of the day, it is a financial decision that somebody could make. And the idea would be that, okay, depending on who's in financial control, you want to be more resilient, or if not, in exchange, you should be the one carrying that risk. So we're trying to create that kind of transparency around both carbon and resilience, just bringing that into the financial decision making of these products. And so, go ahead.
Just when you say standard of care, then, but that's not something that's being imposed upon you. This is something you see as a value driver for yourself as a company. When you say, I'm just interested in that phrase.
It's a term of art, really. It's a term of art in the legal world, and it just says, what should, like, I'm a registered engineer, right? And my primary obligation is public safety. You know what I mean? And then that, depending on my engineering discipline, if I'm electrical, I need to make sure everything I do electrical is good for public safety, and then meets the needs of whatever the project needs are. So right now, up until this point, the standard of care for design has largely been defined by what the local building codes are, and are you competently and adequately designing to those codes? But the question is should we design to the codes? Or should we have known better and designed it to what we know the local risks are? But when we're not in financial control a lot of the times as a design company, then you have to say, okay, well, let's just have this open discussion about it and see where we land. So there's a lot of reasons why. Hopefully I've kind of skipped across the top a little bit, but there's a lot of underlying risks that we just need to intentionally talk about and have honest discussions around. We're going to spend a little more to mitigate it, and maybe we can access some of the funding that Abby's been talking about to kind of defray if there is a premium.
Yeah, I like that as a vector into mainstreaming resilience, the kind of standard of care that you have as professionals, as an industry, yes, what you owe your customers, what you owe folks who may not know the risks, and you do know the risks. So that's an interesting factor. Okay, I want to talk about why you're both sitting here together, what work you've been doing together, and I understand Resiliency Company has been putting together this playbook for commercial real estate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the background is 1 year ago at Climate Week, I sat next to Joe at a Chamber of Commerce Building Resilience event. And we were just starting to explore opportunities in the resilient commercial real estate space. And I asked Joe, if you were me, what would you do to help commercial real estate understand resilience and build more resiliently? He said, all right, well, it is ultimately the people that make the decision on what gets built are not the same people that hold the risk. And so that was the big unlock of, oh, this is a value chain issue, and we need to align stakeholders and sectors to understand if we're going to prioritize resilience as an important part of what gets built, we need to have that entire value chain collaborate on looking at risk, assessing risk, understanding at risk, ultimately so that we can value resilience. So that's why we launched the Climate Risk Playbook, and it's really a collaboration with Ryan Companies, JLL, ULI, and 55 other, which sounds really complex, but what it has been great is, JLL has managed a large portion of this, and what it's done is it's gotten buy-in, and it's gotten really high quality feedback from various sector industries. So kind of the tagline is for the industry, by the industry. And, as a nonprofit, as the Resiliency Company, I like to think that one of our values is connecting these complex networks that probably wouldn't always get in the same room together to talk about these topics, to really step back and say, hey, climate risk is material. We need to do things differently. Here's a playbook for how we can go about doing that.
Yeah, that's great. And I just, every time I'm with Abby, or even when I'm not with Abby, I always compliment her on the speed with which she and the Resiliency Company elected to fund this work. It was pretty much instantaneous, which has just been remarkable. That doesn't often happen, but it did happen on this case. So just been thanks for that, and for the leadership you've given to the work. Yeah, so we've really, we were feeling what we were talking about earlier, this just disconnect between all of that. So so this is a playbook to bring investors and lenders. I'm going to repeat this: investors, lenders, developers, designers, builders, owners and tenants, and insurance companies. So that's the kind of the value chain that produces buildings. And we said, you need to understand what your risks are. And the guidance that we give is both at the enterprise level. How do you need to be setting it up? Because resilience and risk is really is done both. It just gets into the semantics of how you buy insurance. Some is a corporate level thing, some of it is a project level thing, for example, and some things you just need to be doing. So we give each one of these stakeholders guidance, specific things, and this is really management guidance. Do these things at the corporate level, or at least talk about them with your leadership teams. Do these things at the project level. Talk to these different stakeholders about these different. So we're trying to stitch that connectivity between these different project stakeholders together. So, and then what we're working on now is, say, for the construction industry, we'll take that high-level management guidance that stitches all these stakeholders together, and now we're working to go more deeply into construction and say, okay, more specifically, here's the management guidance. What are the specific checklists? What do you need to do? And we're working with other companies, which we'll talk about in the future, big trade associations that will help us give scale to that. So that'll cascade across, say, the American construction industry. They'll have access to all of this. So it's, and then you can do the same thing for other disciplines within that thing. So, for the Architectural Institute, the Professional Association for Architects would look at that and say what they need to do. And so we're pretty excited. I think, what we've said is, I think we've had 55 companies. We have representatives from all over that. And just, I don't know, it's been exciting because every time we talk to somebody about this, they want to be involved. And so we think we're going to continue to grow next year. And as we were saying earlier, we have to pivot from playbook to impact.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it seemed to be the theme of the climate mitigation drive like 5-10 years ago was to have these great collaborations, industry groups, etc., a lot of white papers, a lot of frameworks, and then it really needs to have some impetus behind it to actually be implemented, right? And I think you had that with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. You had Bloomberg pushing it, and that's a big champion to have on your side. And I feel with this, having 55 organizations is great to have buy-in. I do wonder about what sort of potential headwinds within some of these companies might be pushing back. Can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I do. But I just want to say one thing that I think is novel about this thing, and then we'll talk about some of the pushback and headwinds. What's different here is it's very tactical, which I think is important. So in other words, project partners are going to be saying, this is a risk. We've measured it. This is what it is. What do you want to do? At the project level. You know what I mean? So that's what's changing here is that transparency of the risks, the transparency of who's going to own the risk or who's going to pay for it. That's what this thing is really forcing those discussions. So that's, I think, is novel at the project level. Some of the headwinds we got are kind of silly, in my opinion. I've been doing sustainability for 30 years. I've seen it a lot over the years. But some of the things we saw was really around nomenclature,
As in the word climate?
We were calling it the climate risk playbook, and now we're not.
But in a way, I've had to kind of not get too triggered by that. Because I'm not a big person that likes to mince over vocabulary. Let's just say what it is and let's move on. But
I agree with that.
But the reality is we had to say, and this is kind of like when you lean into the resistance, sometimes you kind of come out a little bit better. And I think that's my journey through it. We said, okay, because the title From Vulnerability to Value is actually what we're trying to do. So, okay, and if that makes it more broadly appealable, and what we really want to is we really want these different stakeholders to allow attribution. We want all their brands in. We want them out and proud about the work. And so if we had to kind of put a moniker on it of, hey, this is really what it's all about, from vulnerability to value. And so, but I think, that would probably be the only headwind that I can really see. But I think the playbook is going to create some interesting discussions on projects in the future.
I've noticed a couple things. So one, as you mentioned, like a lot of early think tank white papers. I position the Resiliency Company not as a think tank, but a do tank. So one of the exciting things about this work is how do we take this from a playbook and turn it into funds, action frameworks, things, insurance products, and like early metrics to know if we're being successful in mobilizing capital into more resilient infrastructure. But as I was sitting in a workshop with, about 60 of the playbook, participants and collaborators, I noticed a couple of things that we are asking of the industry in the playbook. So one, looking at risk and deciding on how to think about resilience takes more time. You have to do different pro formas. You have to do scenario planning. You have to look at designs different. It's more cost because it's more time, and it's a change in process.
Those are both barriers.
Right. So like human behavior and, hey, this is going to cost more because we haven't had to do this before, I think is the ultimate headwind, because it's easier to not change now. And so who are going to emerge as some of those early case studies, projects that take the playbook, put it in action, and end up with a more resilient asset and plan because of it, I think will be, what I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to, they're going to have to adapt a little bit to these new capabilities. They have to build new capabilities. And I'm just, I'm a little bit blunt on this point sometimes, but, the companies that do take this on, that do understand we have to change, are respecting what are very in-your-face, obvious megatrends in the world and in the market. And, when you've looked at all the other big things, non-environmental, that have kind of, shaped the world, the digital technology, whatever you want to go back to, like the smart folks out there that were better for the future, made more money, were the ones that read the tea leaves, looked at these big megatrends, and started to build the capabilities that are going to prepare them for the future. So I do think it's a lot of change management. We hit that in decarbonization too. It's, both on the sort of mitigation and the resilience and adaptation side. But just for the listeners out there, I think people have got to start saying, yeah, we do have to change. If we're going to, how many trillions of dollars today of real estate assets are at risk. I mean, I've seen numbers for 1.5, 8.5. I mean, the numbers are just stunning. And for commercial real estate, and I think this is obvious for a lot of folks, but I always like to point it out. We talked about that supply chain of investors and stakeholders that produce buildings, but it's a massive investment sector, and so all that risk is just sitting out there in these portfolios with a lot of money and bonding and all that kind of stuff behind it. So I don't know. I mean, it's time to giddy up on this stuff and not be worried about changing.
Yeah. One thing I've heard is that, yes, that if you spend, what was it again? You'll spend more now to spend less later,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And that's the
Correct.
thing that's come up again, and it's obvious and it's common sense.
Right.
And we've heard from folks like the investor Jay Coe about the unavoidable reality of climate change, the unavoidable opportunity of investing in adaptation. But for some reason, there's that disconnect still in some companies, and it is usually because, well, we can get away with spending X amount now. Let's not wait. Let's not preempt what we have to spend. Let's leave that for next year's problem. And I think that mentality is still there a little bit.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Avoided losses isn't like, doesn't get a board of directors
Yeah.
all rallied on something. But I do think if resilient asset values will increase, and then we'll start being able to talk about the opportunity.
There is, and I'm obviously I'm representing very heavily this issue on commercial real estate. But in January, I don't know if you've covered it in the prior show, but the International Valuation Standard, the new version of that, went in effect in January of this year. And for the first time ever, it included decarbonization, carbon emissions, climate resilience. So it's early stage, but that is going to start to begin to get priced into property appraisals, in a more formal way. So when that starts to happen, I mean, people are going to say, well, I didn't think about decarbonization. I didn't really, yeah, it's not commensurate with the local risks. Well, okay, we have to price that in. In prior jobs, when I was looking at buying big manufacturing plants and all that, we would go in and we would appraise it, and we would look at certain things like water stress levels back then, and we weren't had all the climate stuff available. We'd look at water stress levels, we'd look at the state of their water and wastewater infrastructure, and we'd price that into the offer. We'd say, look, man, I got to spend $10 million on this, so I can give you, I have to take that off the offer because you should have done it.
Well, it sounds like there are some tailwinds then to drive resiliency forward, which is great, as well as some headwinds as well. But it does sound like that battle is going to be hopefully won by the forces of resiliency. And so I'm very grateful for the work that both of you are doing to push this agenda forward. Thank you very much for being here today, and have a great rest of your climate week.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Larry.
you.